I had grown so accustomed to its sound that I no longer heard it most days, only in moments of particular stillness, when the great hall of Thornmere fell quiet between one argument and the next, and the voice of the sea found its way up through the cliff stone and into the bones of the fortress. 3 centuries of that sound. 3 centuries of salt wind off the northern water and cold stone beneath my boots, and the smell of storm lantern oil burning through the night. I had stopped noticing all of it the way a man stops noticing the weight of an old scar. It was simply the texture of existing, and I had existed for a very long time. The alliance terms were spread before me on the council table, vellum sheets covered in the neat hand of my steward, Aldous, who stood to my left and was, at that particular moment, detailing the 3rd clause of the territorial boundary agreement in a tone I had come to recognize as his. "I believe you are not listening, my lord," voice. He was correct, I was not listening. Something had happened to my chest. It was not pain. I want to be precise about this, because in 300 years of battle I have known pain in most of its forms, and what happened at that moment was not among them. It was warmth. A pulse of warmth, low on my sternum, beneath the layered leather of my armor, in the exact place where the mate mark had lived in cold silence, since the Knight Marin of the Moon Council had laid the curse on me and every wolf in my line. A warmth so sudden and so entirely unexpected that I lost the thread of whatever Aldous was saying, and simply stood there for a moment, one hand flat on the table, like a man who has just been told something in a language he was certain he had forgotten. I looked up. The Great Hall of Thornmere is a long, vaulted room cut from sea-cliff stone, its eastern wall open to arrow slits through which, on a clear day, you can see the gray chop of the northern water far below. Storm lanterns hung from iron chains along the ceiling. We had burned them every night for 300 years, and the ceiling above them was dark with old smoke. Along the south wall ran a long wooden table that my council used for lesser business and scribes used when they came to record matters of territorial significance. A woman was being escorted to that table. She was unremarkable in the way that a person can be unremarkable, not plain, not dull, but simply quiet, the kind of presence that does not demand attention. She was dressed in a traveling coat of dark gray wool, well made but not fine, the kind of thing a person wears who must carry it through changing weather on unpredictable roads. She carried a leather case against her side, worn smooth at the corners, and she walked with the careful, attentive step of someone cataloging everything she passed, the iron wall brackets, the carved lintel above the east door, the height of the ceiling, filing it away. Her hair was pinned back without ceremony. Her hands, I noticed even at this distance, were ink-stained. One of my younger wolves was showing her to the table with the elaborate disinterest my pack, reserved for people they considered unimportant. She thanked him. He did not respond. She sat, opened her case, and began laying out her tools with a methodical quiet that suggested she had done this in a great many halls and had long stopped expecting the inhabitants to care. My chest pulsed again. Warmer this time. The 3rd clause, as written, holds the Eastern hunting run as neutral ground through the autumn season, which the Vale delegation has accepted with the single amendment that— "Who is that?" I said. Aldous paused. He is a patient man, which is one of the reasons I have kept him beside me for the better part of 200 years. He looked toward the south table without haste. "The Chronicler," he said. "She arrived this morning. The Neutral Council sends one when an alliance of this weight is being signed to record the proceedings, document the territorial history, confirm the lineage. Standard practice, my lord. You approved the request." I had approved it. I vaguely remembered a letter, a seal, a note in Aldous' hand saying a chronicler would be coming from the eastern settlement for 10 days. I had not given it a further thought. Chroniclers came occasionally. They sat at their tables and wrote in their careful scripts and caused no difficulty and left. The pack ignored them. I ignored them. "Her name," I said. Aldous' eyes moved to me with a precision that I had also learned to recognize, the precision of a man filing something away for future examination. "Sale," he said. "That is all I have. Chroniclers of the Neutral Council do not carry titles." "Sale." She was writing now, one of the preliminary notation pages that chroniclers always began with: the date, the location, the names of the principals, the weather, the condition of the hall. I watched her hand move across the page. She had not looked up since sitting down. She was not apparently curious about me. This was unusual. People in my hall were almost always curious about me, in the taut, wary way that people are curious about something they are also afraid of. The pulse on my sternum came again, and this time it did not entirely subside. I put my hand over the armor above it. Habit. I had not done that in a very long time. Aldous was watching me. I looked back at the vellum. "The third clause," I said. "Go on." He went on. I listened to perhaps half of it. The mate mark had been cold since the 32nd year of my rule, when I was neither young nor old, but somewhere in the long middle of what I was already understanding would be an extremely long existence. The Moon Council of that era had not been pleased with a particular decision I made regarding territorial expansion. Specifically, the taking of the Krell runs by force, which I maintain was strategically sound. And Marin, their eldest, had stood in this very hall and delivered her verdict with the calm of a woman who has been dealing with difficult kings for centuries and finds them predictable. The curse had two terms. The first, I would not die. No battle would take me, no wound would hold, no poison would reach. I was to watch everything I built endure or crumble and be unable to follow it into the ground. She had considered this the greater punishment. She had been correct. The second, the mate mark would go cold. My wolf had felt the early stirring of the bond once, briefly, in those years before the curse, a woman who died of winter fever before anything was ever confirmed. After Marin's work there was nothing, not a flicker, not a warmth. Decades of women presented by my council, alliances proposed and carefully declined, and the mark on my sternum remained precisely what it had become, a scar that had forgotten its purpose. I had stopped expecting it to remember. 300 years is a very long time to wait for warmth, and at some point, without quite deciding to, I had stopped waiting. What I had not accounted for was a quiet woman with ink-stained hands walking into my hall on an ordinary evening to document an alliance I did not particularly want, and causing my sternum to behave as though someone had placed a coal behind my ribs. She worked through the afternoon without looking up. My council members drifted in and out. The Vale delegation's emissary, a brisk woman named Dova, arrived to discuss the 4th and 5th clauses and glanced once at the Chronicler's table with the expression of someone confirming that the scribes were doing their jobs and no further attention was required. She then spent 2 hours arguing with me about hunting rights in a way I found mildly diverting. I was better than half of my attention remained on the south table. Sale ate nothing until one of the serving wolves set bread and a pot of tea near her elbow, apparently by Aldous' instruction. She thanked the wolf without looking up. She drank the tea when it cooled, still writing. When the light through the arrow slits began to change toward evening orange and the storm lanterns became necessary, she stood, rolled her pages with practiced efficiency, secured them in the leather case, bowed to the empty room, a habit so ingrained she did it even with no one watching, or so she believed, and left. The warmth on my sternum diminished as she went. Not gone, but lower, like a banked fire rather than a live one. I sat with that for a moment after the hall had emptied. Then I went to find Aldous. He was in the east corridor, reviewing the next day's schedule with his customary economy of expression. He looked up when I approached. He had that particular quality of stillness that very old wolves develop, the stillness of someone who has learned to wait for the person they serve to say what they have come to say, rather than shortening the path for them. "The curse," I said. "My lord, is there anyone alive from the Moon Council who might be consulted about its terms?" A pause, slight, barely a breath, but I caught it. "I would need to inquire," he said. "The Council's current composition is a matter of some uncertainty. Their youngest member that I am aware of is perhaps 60 years in her tenure." "Inquire," I said. "Of course," he made a note with no change of expression. "Is there a particular term of the curse you wish to revisit?" I looked at him for a moment. Aldous had served me for nearly 2 centuries. He had been present the night Marin delivered her verdict. He knew what the second term was. "I will tell you in a day or 2, I said, and left him to his schedules. Sale returned the next morning. She arrived before the council session, which I had not expected. When I came into the hall earlier than usual, though I had no particular reason to be early and did not examine this, she was already at the south table, the lanterns lit around her, her case open, a cup of something steaming at her elbow, writing. She looked up when I entered. For a brief moment she simply looked at me, composing herself, the way that people who work in a great many halls with a great many important people learn to do. Not afraid, not flustered, simply adjusting. "Good morning, my lord," she said, with the courtesy of someone who does not distinguish between the importance of people she is addressing. A soldier would have gotten the same. "Good morning," I said. I walked to the council table. The mark pulsed steadily with each step that brought me closer to her. When I sat, the council table was perhaps 15 feet from hers. It settled into a low, continuous warmth that I was becoming, against all expectation, accustomed to. She had already returned to her work. I watched her, in the unhurried way that I had learned over 3 centuries, made people less uncomfortable than being stared at directly. She was working on what appeared to be the lineage documentation, the long genealogical record that the neutral council required before any alliance of this tier was ratified. Names, dates, the branching lines of blood and territory. Her handwriting was exceptionally precise. She had a habit of tapping the end of her pen against her lower lip when she was thinking through the next line, which she appeared to do unconsciously. "You arrived before the council," I said. She looked up again. "The lineage work takes more time than most subjects expect. I prefer to begin the day ahead rather than extend the evening." A slight pause. "I hope that is not an inconvenience." "It is not." She nodded and returned to the page. I had questions. I found, unaccountably reluctant to simply ask them. This was unusual. I am not, by nature or by 3 centuries of practice, a man who hesitates to speak. "What does the work involve?" I said. "The documentation." She looked up a third time, and this time she studied me for a moment before answering, as though checking whether the question was genuine or merely the kind of polite noise that people in positions of power make to fill silence before returning to more important things. She determined, apparently, that it was genuine. "I verify the territorial history, boundary changes, significant events, the lineage of the ruling line for the past 5 generations at minimum. I cross-reference against the neutral council's records and any local records that are available." A glance toward the leather case. "Then I document the alliance itself, the terms agreed, the witnesses, the date and conditions. It becomes the definitive record. Courts sometimes consult it a century or 2 later when disputes arise." "You have done this before?" "Many times." "How many halls have you documented?" A brief consideration. 11 in full, several more in partial consultation. "Thornmere is the 12th. "Yes." I leaned back in my chair. The mark was steady, warm, insistent, the way a very old promise might feel if it suddenly remembered itself. "And you will stay 10 days. "Unless the work runs longer." She tapped the pen against her lip again briefly. "It rarely does. Your steward has been extremely efficient. The records he prepared were better organized than most I encounter." "I will tell him you said so. It will please him considerably." She smiled at that, small, quick, genuine. "I'd prefer you didn't. He'll feel obligated to become even more thorough, and I'll never leave." It was a small joke, and not an elaborate one. I have heard a great many jokes over a great many years, in courts and councils and the aftermath of battles, and most of them had been rather less interesting than anything she had said in the previous 2 minutes. This observation settled somewhere in my chest alongside the warmth of the mark, and I found myself entirely uncertain what to do with either of them. The council began arriving. She returned to her work. I returned to mine. But every time I looked up from the vellum, without intending to, I found the south table. 3 days passed. I learned, through the oblique and entirely undignified method of engineering reasons to be present in the hall at unusual hours, a number of small facts about her. She worked with total absorption, the way that some people pray, her attention given over completely, everything else at the edge of her awareness. When she was concentrating deeply, she went very still, only the hand moving. She was not a wolf. I had known this from the first. There was no wolf scent, only the clean human smell of someone who had traveled a great distance and washed carefully on arrival. She had no wolf blood that I could detect, not even the faint trace of a diluted line that sometimes appeared in human communities near old pack territories. She was entirely, straightforwardly human. This was in itself not remarkable. I had known human allies, human advisors, human mates in the histories. It was less common, but it happened, and the fated bond did not require wolf blood on both sides. But it added a particular weight to what I was experiencing, because Sale was not only not a wolf. She appeared to have no idea that a mate mark existed, or what it was, or that anything significant was happening in the 15 feet of stone floor between our two tables. She thought she was here to document an alliance. She thought I was an unusually attentive territorial lord who asked questions about her work. On the fourth evening, as the rest of the hall emptied and she was packing her case in the methodical, unhurried way she did everything, she looked up and found me still at the council table. "You don't have to stay," she said simply. "Not unkind, practical." "I know," I said. She considered this. "The hall is yours. I suppose you stay when you like and leave when you like." "Generally." She closed the case latch with a soft click. "Is there something you need from the records? I can pull any section." What I needed was not in the records. I was not yet prepared to say this, so I said instead, "Tell me about the 11th hall before Thornmere." She looked at me for a moment with that checking expression again. Then she sat back down, set the case on the table, and told me. The 11th hall had been a river territory in the south, a young lord, newly come to his title, an alliance with his northern neighbor that had nearly collapsed twice during the documentation process due to a dispute over water rights that had its roots in a land division made 4 generations prior. She had spent 3 weeks there rather than 10 days, digging through records that had not been well kept, attempting to trace a boundary decision that no one had thought significant at the time. She told it without drama, with the quiet precision of someone who had found the work interesting on its own terms. She was describing, in essence, an administrative problem, and she made it absorbing. Her hands moved when she talked, not broadly, but economically, a gesture here to indicate scale, a finger tapping the table to mark a timeline. The mark on my sternum burned with a slow, continuous warmth. "You like it," I said when she had finished. "The work." She thought about this more seriously than I had expected. "I like that it matters after I've left," she said finally. "Most things that seem important don't at distance. Records do. A record I make in a hall today might be the thing that prevents a border war in 100 years because someone has something true to reference instead of 2 competing claims and no common ground." A pause. "I like the idea of something being true, durably true, written down and witnessed." I had been alive for 3 centuries. I had seen a great many things fail to be durable. I understood what she meant in a way I suspected she did not yet fully know she meant it. "That is a very precise kind of hope," I said. She looked at me. "Yes," she said, "I suppose it is." She left shortly after. The hall went quiet. The tide sounded from far below, as it always did, and the storm lanterns burned, as they always did, and I sat at the council table for a long time after she had gone with my hand over the warm plate of the mark and thought about 300 years of cold, and what it meant that it had ended without warning, in the presence of a woman with ink-stained hands who believed in durable truth. On the 5th day, Aldous stopped me in the east corridor after the morning session. "My lord," he said, with the particular care of a man selecting his footing on uncertain ground, "I need to speak with you about something I observed this morning." He had been standing 3 feet from me during the morning session. He had been standing near me at one point or another for most of the past 5 days. I was not certain what he had observed that he had not already observed, and then I understood. "Go on," I said. "The Chronicler was near you this morning," he said, "when she came to confirm the dates on the 3rd clause and stood beside the council table." He stopped. "Yes," I said evenly. "My lord, the mark," he said it with the careful tone of someone reading from a document they are uncertain is meant for them. "I could see it through your shirt. It was warm. The armor I wear in council sessions is not full battle armor. It is the lighter leather over a linen shirt, the kind that breathes in a closed hall. When I had been standing beside Sale for the 4 minutes she was at the table reviewing the 3rd clause dates, the mark had been at its warmest, apparently warm enough to be visible. I was silent for a moment. "You are certain of what you saw," I said. "I have served you for 193 years, Aldous said. "I remember the mark before the curse, my lord. I know what it looks like when it is awake." He paused. "I also know the terms of the 2nd clause. I know what it means that it is awake." He waited. "Say it," I said. "She is your fated mate." He said it quietly, simply, the way he said most things of great significance, without ceremony, because the significance was already sufficient. The Chronicler, she is the one the Mark has been waiting for, 300 years. I had known it. I had known it since the first pulse on the evening she walked in, and I had spent 5 days arranging reasons to be in the same room as a woman who did not know I existed in any capacity beyond, the territorial lord whose alliance proceedings she was documenting, and telling myself that I was being methodical, careful, that I was waiting for more information. I had been, in the oldest and most recognizable sense of the word, afraid. Not of the bond, not of her. Of what it meant to want something again, after 300 years of having taught myself very thoroughly not to. Yes, I said, I know. Aldous was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was, if anything, gentler than usual. The alliance rite is in 4 days, my lord. I know, I said again. If the mark is witnessed before the rite, and it appears it may already have been. 2 of the council members were looking this morning. Then the pack will know. And if the pack knows the mark has woken, and you bind yourself in the alliance rite to the Vale delegation's terms rather than. I am aware of the consequences, Aldous. He stopped, nodded. Then I will only say this once and not again unless you ask me. He looked at me steadily. In 193 years I have watched you command things. Territory, battle, council, law. I have watched you hold things closed for a very long time. I have never seen the mark awake. A pause. I think it must be a very particular thing, to feel it for the first time in 3 centuries. He left me in the corridor. The tide was somewhere below, and the salt wind came through the stone, and I stood there for a moment with one hand over my chest, and thought about what particular things feel like when they arrive without warning after a long time of nothing. I did not avoid her. I want to be clear about this. In the 2 days that followed, I did not seek out reasons to be near her, because I had spent enough days engineering reasons, and the engineering had become somewhat transparent even to myself. But I did not avoid her. I was present in the hall at my ordinary hours. She was present at hers. We spoke when it was natural and were quiet when it wasn't, and this was, I found, sufficient. The warmth of the mark was a constant now, lower when she was elsewhere in the fortress, stronger when she was near, and at its height when she was close enough that I could hear the scratch of her pen. She asked me, on the 6th day, whether she might consult the old lineage records in the archive room below the hall. I walked her down. The archive of Thornmere is built into the cliff beneath the main fortress, a series of rooms cut from the rock 3 centuries ago, their shelves carved directly from the stone, the records wrapped in waxed cloth against the salt air. It was cold down there. It smelled of old parchment and the sea. She moved through it with the careful attentiveness she brought to everything, noting which records were intact and which had suffered water damage, asking precise questions about dates and events, making her notes. At one point she reached for a record on a high shelf, and I was closer and took it down for her. She looked up, surprised, not that I'd helped, but at the proximity. We were standing very close in the narrow passage between the shelves. The mark was at full warmth. She looked at me for a moment with an expression I could not immediately place, and then placed as the expression of someone noticing something they had not previously attended to, a thought crossing her face. Then she took the record, thanked me, and moved on. I watched her go and thought, she doesn't know what I am to her. She doesn't know any of it, the mark, the bond, the 300 years. She came here to write down a history, and she is doing precisely that, and the universe has seen fit to detonate the most significant event of my 3-century existence in the middle of her professional responsibilities, and she doesn't even know. I found this, beneath the weight of everything else, faintly absurd. I also found that I needed to tell her. Not for any strategic reason, not because the alliance rite was 2 days away, and I needed to resolve the conflict before the council session. Because she deserved to know that she had walked into a hall and done something that 300 years of battle and politics and time could not, and she had done it without trying, simply by arriving, and she deserved to know that this was true. She was writing when I found her again in the archive. I waited until she reached a natural stopping point. She had the habit of finishing a thought completely before looking up, which I had come to recognize, and which meant she was not pretending not to notice me. When she looked up, I said, "There is something I have not told you that I need to tell you." She set the pen down, folded her hands. gave me her full attention with the directness that I had learned was simply her manner with everyone. I told her about the mate mark. I told it plainly, without ceremony, the way I have learned to say things of great consequence. The history of it, what it is, what the bond means for wolves and their pairings, what it had meant before the curse, and what it had meant when the curse went into effect. I told her about Marin and the cold plate on my sternum and 30 years of presented women and nothing, not a pulse, not a warmth, and then 300 years of nothing still. I told her about the evening she had walked into my hall and what had happened to my chest. I told her it had not stopped since. She listened without interrupting. She did not look frightened. She looked careful, the way she looked when she was working through something complex, checking it from multiple angles before committing anything to the page. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that the mark on your sternum, which has been cold for 300 years, woke up when I crossed the threshold of your hall." "Yes, and that this means I am your fated mate. According to the terms of the curse, and according to the logic of the bond as I understand it, yes." Another pause. "I don't have wolf blood," she said. "I know. I don't," she stopped, began again. "I don't know what this looks like from your side, what it means, what it feels like. I have no equivalent. Nothing in my experience to compare it to." "I know that too," I said. "I am not telling you because I expect you to understand it immediately. I am telling you because it is true, and it seemed wrong that you should be in a place where something of this significance is happening to you, involving you, and not know." She looked at me for a long moment. "What does it feel like," she asked quietly, "when I'm near?" This was a more precise question than most people would have asked. She was, I was discovering, consistently more precise than most people. "Warm," I said, as though something very cold has been given back a quality it had long since stopped expecting to have again. She absorbed this. Her eyes were very steady. She did not look away. "And the alliance rite," she said, "is in 2 days." "Yes. Is that a difficulty?" "It is a complication," I said, "not an insurmountable one. The alliance itself, the territorial terms, the boundary agreement, the trade arrangements, those are already agreed and can stand regardless of the rite's form. The rite is a binding ceremony, but a binding of this kind requires the free participation of both parties. If one party withdraws, the terms can still be ratified by a separate instrument. So you could withdraw from the rite without collapsing the alliance." "I could, yes." She was quiet again. Then, with the particular care of someone who has spent a professional lifetime being precise about things that will be read and relied upon long after the moment has passed, "What do you want to do?" No one had asked me that, I realized, in a very long time. Not what the council expected, not what the pack required, what I wanted. "I want to stop the rite," I said, "and I want the pack to know why." She held my gaze. "And what I want," she said, "presumably matters in this." "It is the only thing," I said, "that matters in this." The morning of the alliance rite was gray, the sky low over the northern water. The tide was loud from below, a building weather sound, the kind that in my experience preceded either a fine evening or a very bad one, and I had long since stopped trying to predict which. The great hall was arranged for ceremony. The council table had been moved to the side, chairs set in the formal arc for the witnesses. The veiled delegation stood near the west wall, Dova and her 2 aides, composed and expectant. My pack officers stood opposite. Aldous was at the front, the right documents in his hands, his expression carrying the studied neutrality of a man who had been told certain things in a corridor and was presently waiting to see what the next several minutes contained. Sale was at the south table. She had arrived early, as she always did. Her case was open, her pages ready. She was going to record the rite, as was her function. This was what she had been sent to do. She looked at me when I entered, a single even glance, and returned to her preparation. The mark on my sternum was at its highest. Not painful, it had never been painful, but insistent in the way that a thing becomes insistent when it has been waiting for 3 centuries and is now very close to being answered. I took my place at the front of the ark. Aldous began. He read the opening declarations, the parties, the terms, the weight of what was being bound. His voice was steady and professional and entirely controlled. The 2 council members nearest the south wall were already watching me. I noticed, with the careful attention of people who had been noticing something for several days and were waiting to see whether it became relevant. Dova stepped forward for her part of the rite, and the mark went white. I do not mean that it brightened gradually, warming by degree as Sale's presence reached me across the room. I mean that it changed register entirely, from the low, steady warmth of the past several days to something that I can only describe as light, as though something behind my sternum had shifted from ember to open flame in a single moment. I felt it through the leather of my armor. Saw the edge of it at my collar, a silver-white glow, faint but unmistakable in the overcast morning light of the hall. From 3 feet away, Aldous stopped. Not dramatically. He simply stopped reading, set the documents down at his side with the precise, unhurried movement of a man who has already understood what has happened and is not going to pretend otherwise. The 2 council members near the south wall were no longer watching me carefully. They were staring. Dova looked at my chest, then at my face. She was, to her credit, a practical woman. "My lord," she said, in a tone that contained exactly the right amount of neutrality for a situation she had not been briefed on. "I apologize for the interruption," I said. I said it calmly because I was calm. I was, in fact, calmer than I had been in days, the clarity that comes when you have stopped arguing with a thing and simply allowed it to be true. The rite cannot proceed as written. The hall had gone very quiet. Sale had looked up. I walked across the hall toward the south table. I am aware that this was not the formal procedure. I am aware that there are protocols for the interruption of an alliance rite, that they do not generally involve the presiding lord crossing the room on foot while the assembled council watches. I am further aware that it was perhaps not the most elegant moment of my 3-century tenure. I do not, at this distance, regret any part of it. She stood when I came within a few feet, instinct, the way people stand for someone coming toward them with intention. She looked at my chest, where the glow was visible through the leather, and then at my face. "The mark," she said quietly. "The mark," I agreed. I was aware of every person in the room. I was aware of Aldous, standing with the right documents at his side. I was aware of the veiled delegation, of the council members, of the wolves who had served with me through 100 campaigns, watching their Alpha King stand before a quiet woman with ink-stained hands at the south table of the great hall. I was aware, most precisely, of the mark on my sternum, burning silver-white, visible, witnessed. The first warmth I had felt in 3 centuries announcing itself in a room full of people who would now know what it meant. "I should tell you," I said, "that what is currently visible through my armor is the mate mark, responding to your presence in a way it has not responded in 300 years. I should also tell you that the entire council is watching." "I noticed," she said. "I want to name you," I said, "before the council, as my fated mate, as the one the mark has chosen. I am asking your permission to do so." She was quiet for a moment. Her hands, I noticed, were still holding her pen. She had apparently been so startled when I stood up from the council table that she had not set it down. "What does being named mean?" she asked. "Precisely for me." I told her clearly, as I had tried to tell her everything over the past days, clearly and without omission. What the naming would mean in terms of the Pact's recognition of her. What it would mean for the alliance, which would still stand, the territorial terms ratified by separate instrument as I had described. What it would mean for the bond, and for the curse, and what it was possible the breaking of the curse would mean for me. She listened. Then she said, "And you're asking?" "Yes. You could not simply announce it. It would be binding regardless of." "Sale," I said her name for the first time. I had been avoiding it. It felt too significant, an acknowledgement I was not ready to make until I was making it for real. "The bond is the bond. The mark is the mark. What you choose to do with that information is yours. I will not name you without your consent. I will not bind you to anything without your consent. I am asking." She looked at me for a long time. Outside, the northern water moved below the cliffs. The storm lanterns burned. The council was entirely, completely silent. "Yes," she said. I turned to face the hall. "Council of Thornmere," I said. "Veiled delegation, witnesses to this proceeding, I name Sale, Chronicler of the Neutral Council, as my fated mate, as the one the mate mark has recognized after 300 years of silence. I ask the council to witness this, and to record it alongside whatever record she herself makes of today's proceedings." A sound moved through the assembled wolves, not a word, not a protest, but a collective breath, an intake of recognition. Aldous stepped forward. He looked at the mark for a moment, still glowing at my sternum, silver-white, the warmest it had been since I could not remember when. Then he looked at Sale, then at me. "Witnessed," he said, and his voice, for the first time in 193 years of service, was not entirely steady. "Witnessed and recorded, my lord. The curse broke at noon. I did not know it was breaking until it had broken, because I had nothing to compare it to, no previous experience of being under the curse and then not being under it, and the transition was not, as I had perhaps obscurely imagined, dramatic. There was no flash, no release of pressure. What happened was simpler and stranger than that. I walked out of the hall into the east courtyard, where the wind came off the northern water and the stone was cold under my boots, and I felt the cold. Not the knowledge of cold, not the intellectual awareness that stone in a sea cliff fortress in the north in autumn is cold, the feeling of it. The actual sensation of it, through my boots and up through my feet, the way cold transmits itself through stone and through leather and into the body of a person who is susceptible to the world. I stood there for several minutes, simply feeling it. Sale came out after me. She was wearing her gray coat. She had put it on in the hall in preparation to go, and she stopped when she found me standing motionless in the courtyard with my face turned into the wind. "What is it?" she said, immediately alert. "Cold," I said. She looked at me. "The stone," I said. "I can feel that it's cold through my boots." A pause. "I have not been able to feel temperature in 300 years. It was part of the curse. Everything is present, in a way that it was not quite." She was quiet for a moment. "What else can you feel?" she asked. I considered. "The wind is sharper than I expected," I said, "and there is a smell from the water that I do not think I've been registering for a very long time, salt and something beneath it." I paused. "And the mark is quiet now. It was warmth before, loudly. Now it is settled, as though it has arrived somewhere and does not need to make itself known anymore." She came and stood beside me in the courtyard, looking out at the gray sky over the cliff edge and the northern water below. "Are you all right?" she asked. The question was direct and unadorned, and she meant it entirely. "I think so," I said. "I think I am better than all right, in fact. I am simply new to it, to having sensation returned." I looked at her. "I did not expect it to feel like this. I expected more. I am not certain how to explain it. I expected a great revelation to feel more like a revelation, and instead it feels like the most ordinary thing in the world, as though I simply started again, from here." She looked at me with that steady expression, the one she brought to everything she attended to fully. "That sounds right," she said, "for something that was always supposed to be there." We stood in the courtyard for a while, the wind off the northern water around us, the tide sounding far below. Not speaking after that, not needing to. The mark was quiet and settled, and the stone was cold under my feet, and she was beside me, and these three things, together, felt like the most substantial things in the world. She stayed 3 days past her 10. The lineage work had run longer. This was true and not a pretense, though I do not think either of us would have protested the extension regardless. The alliance terms were ratified by separate instrument on the 9th day. Dova and the Vale delegation departed with the characteristic briskness of people who have accepted an unexpected development, processed it with professional efficiency, and moved on. Aldous managed the documentation with his usual thoroughness. 2 of the younger wolves in the pack, who had been among those watching from the council seats on the morning of the rite, had apparently decided that my years of cold command were either over or in a period of significant revision, and had begun treating Sale with a careful, uncertain deference that I found quietly satisfying. She noticed this and seemed mildly puzzled by it. She was not, in general, a woman who expected to be deferred to. She had spent a great deal of her professional life being the person in the room that no one attended to unless they needed something written down, and the adjustment was not automatic. She asked me on the 12th day about the pack's customs, not as small talk, but with the attentiveness of someone thinking through a subject they intend to understand properly. I told her, all of it, the structure, the hierarchy, the old forms and which of them were still practiced and which had softened over the centuries, and what the naming before the council meant in terms of how the pack would understand her standing. She asked precise questions. She took notes. This I discovered when I glanced over at her page. She had been making careful, systematic notes on our conversation. "You're documenting the pack customs," I said. "I'm documenting everything," she said without looking up. "It's what I do." "Will it be in the official record?" She considered this. "The Neutral Council's record covers the alliance and the lineage. This is supplementary, personal record." A pause. "But yes, all of it. I have never documented anything quite like this before." Her pen moved. 11 halls, none of them had anything like the past 12 days. "I would imagine not," I said. She looked up then, and there was something in her expression, wry and warm beneath the wry, and something else beneath that which she was still being precise about, still checking from multiple angles before she let herself say it out loud. "Raven," she said. She had started using my name on the 3rd day. Each time she did it, I had noticed it. Not with any great display, simply noticed it, in the way that a person whose name has been said by the right person notices it in a different register than usual. "Yes," I said. "I will need to return to the Neutral Council eventually," she said. "To submit the record, deliver the lineage documentation. There are other halls on the list." "I know. And I don't know what I'm supposed to." She stopped, started again. "I don't have a framework for this, what the bond means day to day, how it works. I know the theory of it now from what you've told me, but I don't have." She set the pen down. "I am very good at recording things that have already happened. I am less practiced at the part before they have been recorded." "No one is practiced at it," I said. "That is rather the nature of the before." She looked at me steadily. "What I mean is that I am not going anywhere without understanding where I'm going. I don't want to be named before a council and have it mean something enormous in your world and not know what it means in practical terms for mine." "Tell me what you need to know," I said, "and I will tell you." She nodded once, picked the pen back up. And we spent the rest of that afternoon in the hall at Thornmere, the tide below us and the storm lanterns burning, and she asked every question she had, and I answered every one. And she wrote down the answers with the same care she brought to lineages and boundary dates and alliance terms, as though the truth of a thing and the record of it were the same act. Which I was increasingly certain they were. She left on the 13th morning. This was necessary and practical, and I had known it was coming since the 2nd day. And I will not pretend that the hall was not noticeably different with her absent from the south table, and the leather case, and the pen and the ink-stained hands, and the small jokes that she made without appearing to notice she was making them. It was. I noticed all of it. But she had left the record. 300 years of Thornmere history, documented in her precise, clear hand, the lineage from its founding, the territorial changes, the significant events of each era, and then the alliance, and then the naming, and then at the end of the section she had labeled in her careful script simply additional, present proceedings. The account of the mate mark and the curse and the morning of the rite, and what had happened in the east courtyard when the cold came back through the stone. All of it written down, witnessed, true in the durable way she had described, the way that does not change at distance or with time or with the competing claims of memory. And on the last page of that section, in the same precise hand she used for everything, 3 lines. The mark woke on the evening of the 1st day. The curse broke on the morning of the 12th. I did not come here looking for this. It found me anyway. Below this, she had written her name. And below her name, in a slightly different hand, added later, as a postscript, before she closed the case for the last time, one more line. "I will come back." Aldous found me at the council table that evening, the record open in front of me, the tide loud below in the building weather dark. He did not say anything. He stood beside me for a moment, looking at the page, then looked out at the storm lantern light on the stone ceiling. "She will come back," he said eventually. "She said so," I said. "Yes," a pause. "In 193 years, my lord, I have not seen you wait for anything." "I have been waiting for 300, I said. "A little longer is nothing." He was quiet, then with the particular gentleness he reserved for the most significant things. "How does it feel, the cold coming back, the sensation?" I thought about it. About the stone under my boots in the courtyard and the salt smell off the water and the wind that had been sharper than expected. About the mark, quiet and settled in my sternum, no longer announcing itself, simply present. "Like the most ordinary thing in the world," I said, "as though it was always supposed to be there." Aldous looked at the page for a moment longer. Then he bowed his head very slightly, in the way he reserved for things he considered complete. The storm lanterns burned. The tide moved below. I sat in the hall of Thornmere and felt the cold of the stone and the warmth beneath my ribs, and thought about a woman writing her name in a record at the end of a thing she had not come looking for, and the durable truth of it. She had written herself into the history of this place, the way she had written herself into everything, precisely, honestly, without ceremony. She had written his name last of all,